The clock's relentless ticking echoed through the small, dimly lit room. I stared at the hands, their movements a cruel reminder of the temporal prison I found myself in. It all started so innocuously, a routine train ride, a chance encounter. But now I was trapped in a never-ending loop. I've lost count of how many times I've relived this day. The faces of the commuters blur together, their conversations a monotonous drone. The same announcements blare over the intercom, and the rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks has become a haunting lullaby. At first, it was a mere sense of déjà vu, an odd feeling that something was amiss. But as the loop repeated, the subtle shifts became glaring anomalies. Conversations played out exactly as before, gestures and expressions mirrored in eerie synchrony. It was as though the world around me had become a mechanical puppet show, stuck in a perpetual cycle of repetition. I tried to reach out, to break the cycle, but my words fell on deaf ears. Each attempt was met with vacant stares, as though the others were trapped in their own scripted roles. It was maddening, the futility of it all. As the days, or perhaps eternities, wore on, I started to notice the subtle changes in the people around me. Their faces contorted, expressions twisting into grotesque masks of anguish. I saw it in the twitch of an eye, the trembling of a lip, a flicker of awareness, a glimmer of terror. They were trapped like me, aware of the ceaseless repetition, but powerless to escape. I watched them, the once familiar faces now haunting in their distortion. Each iteration revealed new horrors, as though the fabric of reality was unraveling before my eyes. The woman with the crimson scarf, her laughter turned to hysterical sobs. The old man with the worn briefcase, his stoic facade crumbling into a visage of despair. And then there was him, the man in the worn leather jacket, a perpetual fixture of the train. In every loop, his gaze bored into mine, a silent plea that transcended the bounds of our temporal prison. There was a knowing in his eyes, a shared agony that bound us together in this twisted dance. I couldn't help but wonder what had led us to this nightmarish existence. Was it some cosmic punishment, a cruel twist of fate, or had we stumbled upon some malevolent force, an unseen hand that reveled in our suffering? As the loops continued, I became obsessed with finding answers. I scoured the train, seeking any clue, any hint that could lead to our salvation. But the carriages remained unchanged, frozen in their perpetual motion. Then, on what felt like the 1,000th iteration, a glimmer of hope. A subtle shift in the world outside, a deviation from the endless repetition. The train slowed, grinding to an unfamiliar halt. My heart raced, a surge of anticipation coursing through me. I stepped onto the platform, the cold air biting at my skin. The station was different, unfamiliar, a departure from the suffocating monotony of the loop. I turned, expecting to see the others, to share in the moment of liberation. But the platform was empty, devoid of any sign of life. Confusion gripped me, a sinking realization settling in the pit of my stomach. Had I broken free, only to find myself alone in this fractured reality? The emptiness around me was suffocating, a stark contrast to the crowded chaos of the loop. As I ventured further, the station seemed to stretch on endlessly, its architecture twisting and contorting in unnatural ways. The walls pulsed with an eerie energy, a sensation that sent shivers down my spine. I was no longer in the world I knew, but a nightmarish realm that defied all logic. And then as I turned a corner, I saw him, the man in the warm leather jacket, his gaze locked onto mine. There was a knowing in his eyes, a shared recognition of the horrors that now surrounded us. He beckoned me forward, a silent invitation to join him in this surreal nightmare. With no other options, I followed him, each step a surreal dance through the twisted landscape. The air grew colder, carrying with it the stench of decay and despair. It was a place of forgotten horrors, a realm beyond the bounds of time and reason. As we pressed forward, I couldn't help but wonder happily escaped the loop, only to find ourselves in a new, even more insidious trap. The man in the leather jacket offered no answers, his silence a testament to the incomprehensible nature of our plight. And then, with a suddenness that sent my heart pounding, we emerged into a cavernous chamber. Its walls pulsed with an otherworldly glow, casting eerie shadows that danced in macabre harmony. In the center of the chamber stood a colossal, pulsating heart, a grotesque fusion of flesh and machinery. The man in the leather jacket turned to me, his gaze filled with a solemn determination. I understood then. The heart was the source of our torment, the malevolent force that had ensnared us in this twisted reality. With a shared resolve, we approached the heart, our hands trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. As we reached out to touch it, a blinding light filled the chamber, enveloping us in a searing embrace. And then, in an instant, I was back on the train, the clock's relentless ticking echoing through the small, dimly lit room. The bitter cold gnawed at my bones, every breath a misty plume of desperation. I was alone, isolated in this unforgiving wasteland, far from the safety of our camp. I tried to push aside the creeping fear, to focus on finding my way back. The cycle had begun anew. The rhythmic clatter of the old grandfather clock filled the room, each tick-tock echoing in the hollows of my mind. It was maddening. I was stuck in this never-ending loop, a relentless cycle of repetition that seemed to have no beginning and no end. It started innocently enough on an ordinary Wednesday evening. As I left the office, the street seemed strangely quiet, devoid of the usual bustle. The same stranger bumped into me at the corner, sending my papers scattering in the wind. I remember his face, etched with a look of confusion, as if he too sensed that something was amiss. The first few times, I dismissed it as déjà vu. But the eerie familiarity of each encounter gnawed at my sanity. The stranger's face, the papers tumbling in the wind, it was a scene I couldn't escape. It was as if the world had become a broken record, replaying the same notes of my existence over and over again. Days turned into weeks, and still the loop persisted. I tried to reach out to others, to share the weight of my despair, but their responses were always scripted, their gestures rehearsed. It was as though they were prisoners of their own roles in this twisted play. I became obsessed with breaking free, trying every conceivable method to shatter the suffocating cycle. I changed my routine, took different routes, even tried to leave the city, but it was futile. The loop was an inescapable cage, a purgatory of my own making. As the days blurred together, my grasp on reality began to slip. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in, the ticking of the clock a relentless metronome that echoed in the chambers of my mind. I couldn't remember the last time I slept, couldn't distinguish between one iteration and the next. The stranger's face haunted my every waking moment, a spectral presence that lingered in the corners of my vision. His eyes bored into mine, a silent accusation that sent shivers down my spine. Was he the key to this twisted puzzle, the linchpin holding the loop together? I ventured out into the city once more, determined to confront the stranger, to demand answers. As I turned the corner, there he was, just as I knew he would be. His eyes met mine, a silent acknowledgement of the horrors that bound us together. Without a word, I reached out, my trembling hand brushing against his shoulder. It was as if I had touched a live wire, a surge of electricity coursing through me. The world around us seemed to tremble, reality itself warping and contorting. And then, with a blinding flash of light, I found myself back in my apartment, the clock's relentless ticking filling the room. I was alone, the weight of the loop pressing down on me like a suffocating shroud. Desperation clawed at my chest, urging me to try again, to find a way out of this waking nightmare. I retraced my steps, confronted the stranger once more, but the result was always the same. The loop was an unyielding force, a cruel reminder of my own impotence. As the days stretched on, my mind unraveled further. The boundaries between reality and delusion blurred, my thoughts spiraling into a chaotic whirlwind. I scribbled frantic notes, trying to make sense of the madness that consumed me. Then, one fateful day, as I stared into the mirror, a revelation struck me like a lightning bolt. The face that stared back at me was not my own. It was the stranger, the man who had become my tormentor, my captor. Panic surged through me, my heart pounding in my chest. How had this happened? Was this some sick twist of fate, a punishment for my futile attempts to escape the loop? The room seemed to spin around me, the walls closing in with malicious intent. In a desperate frenzy, I tore through my apartment, searching for any sign of the life I once knew. But every trace of my existence had been replaced by the stranger's imprint. It was as though he had become me, a grotesque parody of my former self. As I sank to the floor, a chilling realization settled over me. The loop was not a prison. It was a reflection of my own fractured mind. I had become trapped in a nightmarish cycle of my own creation, a purgatory born from the depths of my insanity. In the end, it was not the loop that held me captive, but the festering darkness within my own soul. The stranger, the clock, the suffocating repetition, they were all manifestations of my own fractured psyche. And as I stared into the mirror, into the face that was no longer mine, I understood. There was no escape, no reprieve from the horrors that lurked within. I was forever bound to this twisted reflection of reality, condemned to relive the same nightmare for all eternity. The relentless ticking of the old grandfather clock reverberated through the room, each second stretching into an eternity. It was a sound that had become both my companion and my tormentor. You see, I was trapped in a time loop, an unending cycle of moments that stretched out before me, a never-ending déjà vu that refused to release its grip. At first, it was subtle, a feeling that something was amiss, a sense of familiarity that danced on the edges of my consciousness. But as the days wore on, the repetitions became glaringly apparent. The same faces, the same conversations, the same mundane routines played out over and over again. I tried everything to break free. I altered my actions, made different choices, but it was as though the world was stuck in a loop of its own. No matter what I did, the outcome remained unchanged, the cycle perpetuating with a cruel indifference. As the days turned to weeks, I noticed a subtle shift. The period of the loop was growing shorter, the moments blurring together in a dizzying whirl. It was as though time itself was unraveling, a tapestry of existence fraying at the edges. Each iteration brought with it a strange sense of déjà vu, a haunting echo of moments that I could almost grasp, but never fully hold on to. Faces contorted, gestures became frenzied, and conversations devolved into incoherent babble. The world around me seemed to flicker and distort, a nightmarish funhouse of fractured reality. I turned to the others, hoping to find solace in their familiar faces, but their expressions mirrored my own confusion, their eyes filled with a desperate longing for release. We were all prisoners in this twisted dance, bound by a force beyond our comprehension. As the periods grew shorter, the world around me became a blur of motion and sound. The once familiar streets were now a chaotic maze, a cacophony of overlapping voices and frenetic movement. It was a dizzying, disorienting descent into madness. With each passing day, the boundaries of my reality grew more tenuous. I could feel the edges of the world fraying, reality slipping through my fingers like grains of sand. I scribbled frantic notes, trying to make sense of the maelstrom that consumed me, but the words were disjointed, a nonsensical jumble. And then one day, as I stood in the midst of the chaos, a revelation struck me like a bolt of lightning. The time loop was not a prison. It was a reflection of my own fractured mind. The world around me was a distorted mirror, a manifestation of the insanity that had taken hold. In a moment of desperate clarity, I understood. I was the architect of my own torment, the creator of this never-ending nightmare. The loop was a manifestation of my own unraveling sanity, a purgatory born from the depths of my fractured mind. With a newfound determination, I faced the maelstrom head-on. I embraced the chaos, let it wash over me in a tidal wave of sensation and emotion. The boundaries between reality and delusion blurred, the distinctions between moments and memories blending into a surreal collage. And then, with a blinding flash of light, it was over. I stood in the quiet stillness of the room, the echoes of the loop fading into the recesses of my mind. I was free, but as I looked around, a chilling realization settled over me. The room was empty, devoid of the familiar faces that had haunted me for so long. The world outside was silent, a frozen tableau of stillness. I was alone. In that moment, I understood the true cost of my escape. The loop had been a prison, but it had also been a lifeline, a connection to a reality that was slipping further and further away. Now I was adrift in a sea of emptiness, a solitary figure in a world that had forgotten me. As I stood there, staring into the void, a sense of profound loss washed over me. I had escaped the loop, but at what price? The world had moved on, leaving me behind in the shadow of my own fractured mind. And so, I made a choice. I turned away from the empty room, from the silent streets, and walked back into the heart of the loop. It was a bittersweet return, a surrender to the familiar chaos that had come to define me. As the world once again dissolved into a whirlwind of motion and sound, I embraced it. The loop was my reality now, my sanctuary in the midst of the madness. It was a fractured existence, but it was mine. And so, I continued to dance on the edges of time, a solitary figure in an endless sea of moments. The clock's relentless ticking is my lullaby, its rhythm a comforting reminder that I am still here, still a part of this strange and twisted world. And in the end, perhaps that is enough.